We all know that humans are visually reliant species, and since it is natural to us to depend on our sight, our eyes are able to adapt with the changes of light in our environment. This adaptation is caused by the cones and rod cells in our eyes. Now, cone cells, which are about 6 to 7 million, are mainly for bright light, while rod cells, which are about 90 million, are mainly for dim light conditions. Now, the reason for the difference is because there are three types of cone cells, which corresponds to blue, red, and green spectrum or the wavelength. Meanwhile, rod cells can only perceive one wavelength in the blue-green spectrum. And that explains why we only see blue and dark colors at night, the Purkinje effect.
Knowing that these two tiny balls we have called eyes begin to function on their own the moment we open them is incredibly fascinating. The moment we see lights or photons in the surrounding area, our photoreceptor cells work immediately, specifically cones, which are cells responsible for perceiving bright colors such as blue, green, and red. At the same time, we also have rod photoreceptors, which work in low light conditions that perceive black and white colors. Since humans are visually reliant, if you are planning to go to a solar eclipse observation with your friends or colleagues, make sure to wear alternating vibrant colors in order to ensure the Purkinje effect for better lighting and experience.
Our eyes are so complex that even advanced objects such as lenses or camera sensors can reproduce the same object that it can be perceived. Isn't it amazing how we have those millions of rods and cones responsible for our perception? Cones are responsible for bright light as are rods for low light. Moreover, a solar eclipse is the best example of a phenomenon that shows the Purkinje effect, or the change in color spectrum in the surrounding environment that we people adapt to. During a solar eclipse, the outputs from the cone are decreasing as it slowly functionless because the light is getting dimmer. On the other hand, rods are starting to function more as they are responsible for low light, and this shifting happens in the mesopic zone.
During an eclipse, our eyes perceive the color of our surroundings to decrease in saturation. This is because the photoreceptor cells in the eye are responding to the decreasing of light. Since the mesopic zone is dim enough, the receptors can send signals to the visual cortex to transition into a nighttime vision, and thus rods are more triggered to respond than the cones when there is less light, even when there is an increase of red spectrum coming from the limb of the sun.
There are two types of photoreceptors, the cones and rods. Cones are responsible for color vision in bright light, while rods are more sensitive to low levels of light but are less sensitive to colors. This connects to the video about Purkinje effect, which refers to the phenomenon that happens when the perception of the color in the eye shifts during a change in lighting conditions. The visual system relies more on the information provided by the rods, which are more sensitive to blue-green wavelengths of light, which causes colors to appear less vivid and to shift towards blue and green as light levels decrease. Best example is an eclipse that allows us to slowly adapt to the dark and gives us a slow transition to night vision through the mesopic zone, creating the Purkinje.
If I were to relate our topic last week, which is all about visual perception in the brain, to the Purkinje effect, early visual processing begins in our eyes, which capture the light and falls into our retina. We have photoreceptors in our retina that convert light into neural signals, and these neural signals will be received by our primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe and will go to our prefrontal cortex to interpret what color we see. As a result, we see changes of colors in our surroundings during solar eclipse depending on the amount of light present on Earth.
He notices the Purkinje effect while watching the 2017 total eclipse, which occurred during the summer while standing on a green field with many people dressed in a bright summer colors. He notices less contrast in red colors as they become darker due to less output, but he notices a overrepresentation of blue-green colors due to more red output, and he appreciates the Purkinje effect as a result of this shift. Furthermore, He perceived the effect due to photoreceptor D rods, which require less light energy to trigger a response but produce a poorer resolution, and they are primarily responsible for our less acute black and white vision at night.
In the video that we saw, it was about the eclipse and the Purkinje effect. Since the Purkinje effect was already explained by my fellow classmates, it was also explained that when we experience the mesophic condition in the eclipse, that's when the Purkinje effect happens. We have photoreceptors in our eyes that are called the cones and the rods, in which the cones are meant for colors and rods are for black and white vision or adjustments that happen during the night. The functions of our eyes brain system is an absolutely interesting process because basically we receive visual information on a daily basis. There's beauty in everything we see, and apart from that, we are allowed to see colors and adapt to darkness.
According to the video, the retina and our brain have an unbelievable range of light adaptation to continually adjust for the decreasing lighting and expose the surroundings for us. The retina is also covered with two types of light sensing cells called cones and rods. We have 6 to 7 million cone cells and we all use them for bright light conditions, and they give us vision with fine detail and allow us to see color. Meanwhile, we have 90 million of the latter and operate in low light conditions. A total eclipse is the perfect situation to allow our eye-brain system to slowly transition into nighttime vision. Here, the mesopic zone is where the Purkinje effect happens since it all depends on how much light is in our surroundings.
Purkinje effect is a phenomenon in which the brightness and colors perception of an object shifts based on the amount of light present. This effect is related to the way our eyes and brain process visual information under different lighting conditions. During a solar eclipse, the amount of light present varies rapidly, which can have a significant influence on how our eyes and brain interpret the surroundings. This effect activates photoreceptor cells in the retina. Cones aid in color vision and are more sensitive to higher light levels. Rods, on the other hand, are in charge of black and white vision and are more sensitive to low light levels. Both types of cells are required by our brain to interpret color and brightness, although rods are essential in low light setting. Because cones are less active during an eclipse, our perception of color shifts to shorter wavelength, making the surroundings appear grayer and blonder than they would under normal lighting conditions.
Connection with this week's topic about visual acuity, I really find this topic in connection with the video reference fascinating and makes me learn more about how our eyes perceive impulses and outperform its capabilities in various light conditions. As the Purkinje effect means that it is a shift in color spectrum from wavelength to a gradual and an entirety shift to blue, and it is a phenomenon mostly observed during a total solar eclipse. Interestingly, it is also the findings show that 95% of the light's been decreased, but since the observer didn't have the knowledge that there's an eclipse going to commence that day, that's just the time before the Purkinje effect kicks in approximately 2 minutes before the totality of the
The Purkinje effect, also known as the Purkinje phenomenon, is the propensity of the eye's peak brightness sensitivity to shift toward the blue end of the color spectrum under low light conditions as part of dark adaptation. Rods are responsible for taking control of low light vision. Rods have poor spatial acuity and do not mediate color vision. Cones are active in bright light, have color vision, and are responsible for great spatial acuity. If the two photoreceptors are damaged, there will be a vision loss, just like in an eclipse where the sun is blocked by the moon, where the sun represents the two photoreceptors that are responsible for the function of the vision.
The Purkinje effect explains why we perceive our surroundings as grayish or silverish color. This occurs during the totality of solar eclipse, in which our surroundings turn into grayish or silverish color. Before the occurrence of solar eclipse, our cones manifest because we see a color vision, which produces high resolutions of the objects we see. As the solar eclipse approaches, the scotopic or night vision takes place because of the presence of rods in it. The way we perceive solar eclipse happens because of the presence of rods in our eye. On the other hand, the presence of the cones in our eyes is the reason why we see a high resolution in every object in our surroundings.